crashed and this country was thrown into a depression like this country has never seen before. And suddenly everyone with investments or everyone with savings, suddenly all the future that this country, that these Americans thought they had, suddenly it disappeared. And factories shut down and there were no jobs and you couldn't get food. You had, some of you even remember, standing in line for a loaf of bread. Over 1/2 of Americans were out of work. 1 out of every 3 young people, and I'm saying 12 and over, were neither in school nor employed. People were very afraid. And even though Franklin had only served one term as governor, they looked to Franklin to be the one that could help this country recover. And I did hear it from Franklin himself. I heard it from Louis Howe that he wanted to run for president. There was talk of him running for president in 1932. When the veterans were protesting because they had lost all of their benefits from World War I, Hoover sent in the National Guard and chased them all away, wiped them out. These were our veterans. When Franklin became president, we made sure that those World War I veterans received their pensions and their benefits. And they joked that when the veterans lost all their rights and all of their deserved pensions, that Hoover sent in the army, but Franklin Roosevelt sent in Eleanor. I never wanted to be the First Lady. I was never good at what First Ladies are expected to do. And that is to stand looking lovely on the arm of her husband and entertain and hold dances and dinners and try to look somehow fashionable. I was afraid that I would have to give up everything that I had been working on for the past 2 decades. But there was a female reporter by the name of Lorena Hickok, an AP reporter, who pulled me aside and said, "Mrs. Roosevelt, we know that you do not want to be the First Lady. But if you are, you have the opportunity to be a First Lady unlike any that this country has ever seen. You can be a voice for the oppressed. You can be a voice for women. You can be a voice for the young people. And you can be a voice for the minorities." Franklin had a wonderful vision called the New Deal. And when he was elected, I decided it was my job to make sure that that New Deal was a fair deal for every American, not just white men. Scripps Howard Publishing offered me the opportunity to write a column as First Lady called My Day. And I think they envisioned it as a column where I would write about what it was like to be First Lady in the White House, all about fashion and... I was never known for my fashion sense. In fact, the only time I made headlines because of my clothes was when First Lady dares to go sleeveless. I wore a sleeveless dress in the middle of August, and that made the front page. They would have really been upset if they knew I didn't have stockings on that day either. And dining in state dinners, I had no idea what to do in the kitchen. I never learned to cook. I could only make very bad scrambled eggs. And so I hired a cook. But she was as bad a cook as I was. And yet she had such a nice personality, I didn't have the heart to fire her. And so truly, people that were invited to the White House for dinners knew very well that it would be wise to eat before you come. It was all a flutter in the White House when we heard that the King and Queen of England were coming at the end of the 1930s, 1939. And everyone was, "What are you going to serve the King and Queen of England?" And I did not have the time to think about it. So I said, "What's more American than serving hot dogs?" And that's exactly what we did. And I remember Franklin sitting next to King George, and he served a hot dog, and King George is, "What am I supposed to do with this?" And he picks up a knife and a fork. And Franklin said, "No, that is not the way you eat a hot dog. You pick it up, you stick it in front of your mouth, and you keep shoving and shoving and shoving and shoving until it's all gone." Having the My Day column was a wonderful vehicle for sharing what meant most to me at that time, and that is social issues. Issues for women, issues about young people getting back to work or in school, out of factories, and especially the plight of the minorities in our country. Lorena Hickok was a field reporter, and she would often take me with her around the country to see how people were getting along and what we could do for them. And for the first time, I was truly stricken by the fact that our country was made up of two very separate social classes, the white and the Negro. And everywhere I went, Negroes were subjected to inferior living conditions, inferior schools, low job opportunities, often blocked from voting. They weren't enjoying any of the freedoms that were supposed to be guaranteed for every single American. My first column in my day was about Negro schools. And I wrote that if the schools were poor, you can expect that the living conditions are also going to be poor. And those few articles helped me win the hearts of many Negroes in this country, and they understood that I was one person who could be a voice, perhaps, for them. Do you know that at that time there were no laws against lynching in this country? The South was still overrun with Jim Crow laws. And whether it was real or imagined, many Negro men, sometimes women and sometimes children, would be dragged out of their homes, lynched, tortured, executed, mutilated, horrible things. And there would be very, very little, usually a white jury would acquit whoever the perpetrator was. There were no anti-lynching laws. When I tried to work with the NAACP and Walter White to make sure that these laws went through Congress, the southern states became very irate and said they weren't necessary. Even Franklin, as much as he was sympathetic, said, wait, you must not move too quickly. Civil rights will come, but we can't move too quickly because we will alienate all of the constituents in the southern states. There were newspapers who threatened to cancel my column. But I was always the lightning rod. I was the activist, and Franklin was the politician. And Franklin, sometimes when people would question him about his out-of-control wife, he would throw up his hands and he said, you know who she is, what am I supposed to do with her?